A little too hot there, Freddie.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. This is thin shirt with a long sleeve and slogan.
This is Texas for you. It's October, or almost over with, and we're still gonna have to ski. So welcome to Texas. How's it feel to be out here?
It's good. When I was packing up, I left all my t-shirts behind.
T-shirts and shorts. That's what we need out here. That's how we all.
That's what my handler's wearing here.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you here. There's a lot to talk about, but you know, I'm sure you get so many questions. But I just wanted to actually start from the beginning of when you fell in love with comic books and just superheroes in general. Your earliest memory as a child, where you got introduced to what a hero is, or even what a villain is.
I got into comic books when I was very young, going over to my aunt and uncle's house, which were terrible people. They were just wretched to be around, and so I would always sneak up to the boys' room, and they had all these Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck comics. And I fell in love with Uncle Scrooge. And then later on, we would be going up to Torch Lake in Michigan. It was a 12-hour drive in a station wagon. And I would be in the back of the station wagon with whatever comics I could buy for a nickel from the used clothing store. They had a little section over there. And that's where I learned about Captain Comet and a few other ones along the way. I remember Captain Comet for some reason because I did a story with it years later. After that, at one point, there was a Green Arrow story drawn by Lee Elias, and on the splash page, back in those days, nobody had any credits. This was the 1950s, Dark Ages. And basically, he had snuck his signature in some shrubbery in the bottom. And I looked at it and I went, wow, people do this for a living? And I was about 8 years old at that point, and I think at that point I decided that's what I wanted to do. And my dad was a draftsman for Chrysler. He worked on dashboards and stuff like that. He went from the designer drawings to the blueprints for the printers. And one of his fringe benefits he thought he deserved was at the end of the day he would stick as much tracing paper, number 2 pencils, and masking tape into his briefcase to abscond with. And he thought he was going to use these for his woodworking hobby. I found I could trace the comic book characters. And for the longest time I had a wall in my bedroom that was just covered with tracing paper drawings of Jack Kirby and different people. And eventually that hobby grew into an obsession, and I started drawing it, and the obsession turned into a desire to have a job, and the job eventually came, and now 50 years later, I'm completely unemployable as anything other than this.
Comic books have been around for a very long time. You know, has it changed to you? Like when you pick up a comic book the first time, so when you pick one now that have the same feeling in your hand, you pick one up modern days.
They no longer cost a dime. That's one thing. The printing is so much better. The color process. When I started off, we had 72 colors we could choose from, variations of the 3 primaries in black. And now with the computers, there's millions of colors I can choose. I just love sitting with the computer coloring these books.
Talking about your early days, were there any mentors or influences that really helped shape your career in the early days getting into the industry?
Steve Ditto and Jack Kirby were my gods. When I was 16, I went to the New York's World's Fair, and my parents decided to let me run loose, and I ran into Manhattan, and I had 4 phone numbers that I found. Carmine Infantino, I think it was Joe Kubert, Steve Ditko, and I think Jack Kirby, who was still in New York at that time. And the only ones that answered was Carmine. And he said, oh no, Carmine's never here. He's a drunk. We never see him coming up to the studio anymore. And only years later, when I met Carmine up at the BC Studios when he was a publisher, I said, God, I remember that voice. But Steve Pietro, on the other hand, asked where I was at. I said, I'm only a couple blocks away. He said, okay, come on up. And he spent 2 hours with me showing me what he was doing, had these notebooks that were filled with drawings that he had made of drapery, folds in the arm, folds in pants. And whenever he was going through Spider-Man, he would just put these things in and say, oh yeah, that's how I got to do that. And that was really a great experience. And then years later when I got out of the service and started working with Marvel, I met him again, and of course he didn't remember me. In fact, he was really kind of surprised when I dedicated the book to him.
So he's a meaningful person in your life and really helped kind of maybe advance a little further with some of the stuff he showed you. Is there anything about his work that resonated with you as a young artist and writer?
Oh, Ditko?
Yeah.
His storytelling and his stories. He used to do a book called Amazing Adult Fantasy. And it was all these mind-blowing little 6 or 8 page stories of some guy who kept waking up and going back into a dream and then going back into a worse dream and worse dream. They were all really different, and I think Steve, more than anything else, affected my writing. Kirby was my drawing guy, and when I got to New York itself, there was a whole avalanche of people who were influences. All the writers and artists from the 1930s, they were all retired, and there was this whole influx of young people coming in, like Howard Chaykin, Walt Simonson, Windsor Smith, Jeff Jones, Mike Luda, Bernie Wrightson. And we would have these first Fridays where we go to Frank Brothers' house and our apartment together, and everyone would get drunk and show off each other's drawings, and our egos would go crazy. But I was learning a lot, especially from Bernie. Bernie's stuff was just so incredible, just the lighting that. And everybody there was some kind of influence on me one way or the other.
I love hearing that. And you know, there's no secret that you created some very memorable characters. When you were creating most of your characters for the first time that no one's ever, been introduced to, we have, Thanos, we also have Gamora, Shang-Chi. Do you ever think that they'd be some of the most popular characters, today? Did you, when you were drawing and creating them, or were you imagining them to be what they were today?
When I was drawing them, there was no movies.
Yeah.
In fact, all the spaceships were on wires still. And basically, no, I never thought, and even when the movies came out, I never expected Thanos to be there. I just thought he would be too strange and esoteric.
So when you did see him, let's go back to this, when you did see him show up on the big screen, what were your initial thoughts on that?
Well, I was on the outs with Marvel Entertainment, editorial at that point. We had part of the company. So I only learned about Thanos being in the movie the day before the internet covered. And so I went to a midnight show the next day. And your typical midnight movie show, there was 2 kids behind me. One was obviously a comic book fan, and the other one was a cartoon fan. And it talked throughout the movie. It was okay. It's that kind of thing. But at the end, when Thanos shows up, I hear the comic book fan go, Thanos!
We all did that, right? We all when he showed up.
And then the cartoon fan goes, who's Thanos? And I think that's the last time I ever heard that, except for me talking like this.
What are your thoughts, like seeing his design and hearing the voice? Is that kind of close to what you imagined when you first created him, or just a?
Yes, I always figured he had sort of a gravelly voice, a very refined sounding. Roland just did a terrific job. He was up here last night.
Did you get a chance to meet him yet? Have you met him?
I met him at the premiere, and we had a brief talk here yesterday, and I'm going to meet him later on this house.
Awesome.
But no, I never thought he was going to make it anywhere other than on the page. In fact, he had a very interesting history because I created him in '72, and it wasn't until Ron Mars, I think, wrote him into a couple of things, and then there was one Kazar story where it had an X-Men villain that they wouldn't allow in, so Andy Kubert had to go back and redraw the X-Men villain into Thanos fighting Kazar, which always struck me kind of strange because I thought the cover should be a big red spot with Thanos standing over. But instead they had an X-Men. For the longest time, nobody did anything with it except me for like 30 years. Marvel would think they were hiring me to do a Captain Marvel story or a Warlock story or a Silver Surfer, but basically they eventually learned they were going to get a Thanos story from me. And so we eventually started doing Thanos comic books. And that's where it went from there. Suddenly, the movies came out, and I really had to fight to get any kind of job to work on Thanos. They didn't want me to touch it.
Is it surreal to see how far your work has gone from that long ago, to see how he pretty much carried that MC as a big bad in the background in the shadows, and now he's, really a great performance and just seeing it on screen for all those sagas.
Well, the first time I saw Josh Brolin as Thanos, he was naked. They had done a test run at the screenwriters, Marcus and McKinney were showing me around, and they had done a test run of a scene that they didn't use in the movie, and he's sitting there in the dark talking, and he's because they hadn't put on the costume went on later. So I'm sitting there going, and I knew this in my head, but my first thought was, oh, Marvel's going to do an X-rated movie. Interesting. Of course, it didn't turn out that way.
Going back, what was your inspiration for creating Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet? Where did that all come about? Because it's brilliant and obviously had a big stay for a long time, obviously, where they adapted it into a feature film.
Well, my elementary school days was at a parochial Catholic school, and we had to go to church 6 times a week. So Catholicism, spiritualism, deities were all pounded into me really early, and then when I got out of the service, I took a junior college class. One of them was a psychology class, and we had a guest speaker who came in and talked about the Freudian concepts of heroes and Thanos. And basically, I latched onto the dark side to start off with. Heroes was kind of an afterthought that we didn't really do anything more with for 20 years. But then when he started doing well and we were doing Silver Surfer, they asked me to continue. There was a spell where Marvel was owned by this group called Revlon Company, and they would do anything to get more money out of it. This was a time when every X-Men had his own miniseries at one point. They actually put out an ad to the retailers saying, you should want to shake every penny out of your customers you can. We'll show you how. So I took over the set of the Surfer writing with Ron Lynn drawing it, and it sold really well. And they said, let's do something more. And that's what the Thanos Quest came out of. And the pre-orders on that were really good. And so they said, oh, we're going to do a big crossover, like Secret Wars, which made everybody mad, because everybody who worked on Secret Wars hated it. It was a lot different than what we did on Infinity Gauntlet. Everything had a crossover. But on this, we said, if you want to cross over on it, you can. If you don't have to. So the only people that gave us any trouble were the X-Men editor, who didn't want any X-Men in it. But they finally gave us 2, Cyclops and Wolverine. And basically, at that point, I said, well, what are we doing here? We got to get to this huge menace. And I started thinking about parochial school and going, I wonder if he's not a benevolent God. Maybe he's a nasty and malevolent God. And so that's where the stones came from. I had used them earlier in the Avengers Annual or something like that, so I knew there was more of them, but I didn't know what they were for. And so we put all that together, and originally I had set it up so the stones were all on his head. But he looked like Brainiac. So I said, forget that, and we put him on the glove. And I remember sending a little sketch of it to Ron Lynn, and then he just worked it up even more, and it worked out really nice.
Oh, that's amazing. We love Thanos, don't we? He's our favorite guy. I have that mini gauntlet, the one that they made that's a life-size one. I have that same one.
A sideshow.
Yeah, I have that. That's a beautiful thing, and I get reminded every day of your creation, Mr. Starlin. And that question from the inspiration for Thanos came from Emily and Chris. Thank you so much for that. Where's Emily and Chris? Somewhere here? It's all right. There they are back there. Thank you so much for that. Let's see what questions we have here. From Lenore and Kyle. Kyle, Lenore, somewhere? Hands up somewhere? It's really right.
I knew it wasn't going to fit a crowd the size of Brolin kind of surprised how much we did fill in
We
here.
did, there's quite a few. But everyone's excited to be here. Question here is, when creating characters, do you ever check if something similar already exists? Like if you were inspired by an existing character, but unknowingly, and that's where some creation happened. It's unknowingly, and it was similar to something else.
Well, I always like to clear up one point on Thanos. At one point, when we started, I brought in the design, Roy Thomas, the editor, said, beef him up more, which I did. And then somewhere along the line, he said, in the interview, beef him up. I told him to beef him up like Darkseid. And so the thing came out that I sort of ripped off Darkseid to make Thanos. But the truth is, I ripped off Metron for the same series. He's got the same brows, the visors over his brows, and that. He was more of an inspiration than Darkseid was. But, you know, and the strange thing was that they both started inflating as they went along. I started making Thanos bigger, and then started making Darkseid bigger over at DC. And so everyone sort of thinks that this link that they actually did a crossover where they fight. But it was Metron the inspiration more than anything else.
You worked for Marvel and DC. What's the biggest difference you saw between the two of them when you walked in?
Marvel will do anything to make money, and DC will do anything to screw themselves up to make money. Yeah, every job over at DC I ever did was a challenge because they let the editors of each division be sort of like keep themselves, and we did a thing called the Weird, where he writes in that. And originally in the story, the Macblots, who are the bad guys, take over Superman and Wonder Woman, I think it was, at the time. And that's the rest of it, we have to fight it. But John Byrne was doing Wonder Woman at the time, said, you can't use that. So I said, okay, how about Captain Marvel? Or maybe it was the other way around, Captain Marvel. And yeah, it would have been Captain Marvel. And basically they said, you can't do that because the people who own the rights to it made it. And we kept going down the list, everyone kept, all these editors kept saying, no, you can't use that character. And finally we ended up with, I can't remember his name, he was some big I lost the name, but he was Infinity Incorporated. His name was Neutron or something like that. And I had no idea who he was, and so I had to read like about 5 or 6 issues of Infinity Incorporated to find out if he had any speech dialogue and everything like that that you didn't. And basically, he was thrown in there at the last moment, and Bernie kept going, who is this character?
A question we have here from Katrina H. There we go, right there. Here's this one. What is the one thing you love about crafting a universe that you've done so greatly so many times?
I tend to craft universes so I can avoid having to draw either cars or horses. That's my standard answer. The truth is, I learned early on you don't want to be preaching in comics. A couple of my Captain Marvel, early Captain Marvel sort of bordered on that. That's why your Steve states that you don't want to be preachy, you want to entertain. I mean, sneak your thoughts in there, which I did from that point on. And basically, it was more easy to do a story that had some meat on it in a different setting than it would have been in if I placed it on Earth. Because even back then we were having a lot of reactions from different people from different parts of the country that didn't like stories that had anything to do with racial discrimination. They would get all sorts of hate mail from some of the shop stewards who started becoming powerful entities within it. So it was just easier to do stories that was set away from here and then do what I wanted to do. Plus it also kept me from editorial. They said, you do whatever you want.
No cars, no horses.
No cars.
Alex has a question here. Which of your runs was the most fulfilling, and what's your favorite single issue of the artwork? Let's see if we can answer that one.
My favorite run is Dreadstar.
Yeah.
Dreadstar I've been doing 3 80s, and then have recently brought it back and we're doing it through Monkey Wrench Press. We've got 2 books out. They're available at the table later on if you're interested. The third one, the third graphic novel we're going to do the Kickstarter. That's how we pay for the printing. In about 2 weeks. They should be announcing that. My favorite story is Death of Captain Marvel. My favorite mini is the Thanos quest, because he's more Thanos in that than he's in any other book, ever. He's so nasty in that one. What was anything else?
Favorite runs and favorite television. I think you answered them, yeah, you did. But are you surprised that Marvel never brought back Captain Marvel after you told him?
No, Jim Shooter was very adamant about that he would not let him come back. And we have brought him back, and I was actually involved in one of them, a later Captain Marvel, where his son, Captain Marvel, and he meets his father, but it's from another dimension or something like that. It was kind of fun to do. It was with Peter Davis, so that's why I did it.
Speaking of Dreadstar, can you talk about the inspiration to kind of go create your own thing, and what's your future vision for this?
Well, when I met Jack Kirby, he told me that all of his characters had a single line theme to them. He told me the Hulk was stupidity. The harder you beat on it, the stronger it becomes. And so that stuck with me. And so each one of the characters that I've done, I've sort of put into that kind of perspective. Thanos' appetite can never be satisfied. He continuously makes these grand plans, succeeds at it, and then lets it slip between his fingers. Dreadstar he's an anarchist without a second act. He's very good at overthrowing unjust governments, but when he has to run a show, he screws it all up. He worked as a police officer for a while, and he was miserable at it. And in the new series, we finally found the spot for him to work within the society where his penchant for overthrowing governments can be put to good use and constructive use, as opposed to leaving ruin to what he was used to in the back in the old days.
Well, that's exciting that you decide to kind of go back and do your own thing and push Dreadstar as much as you can. I mean, that's going to be a wonderful as you continue to do it. So what are the major plans for this as well moving forward?
We have the 2 books out. I'm working on the 5th book right now. Maker is working on the 4th book. Slowly she's got health problems, so we haven't been moving as fast as we want. In the meantime, I'm taking periodic runs out to LA to talk to people about the streaming series. We haven't had success yet. We had one producer who took it on. He went into rehab, and then he came out and died 2 weeks later of an overdose of fentanyl and cocaine. And that's sort of put the call on the property in there. I said, oh no, the last guy died. I don't want to take this one. But we were still trying, and I think that eventually we'll succeed. I don't want to do a movie, I want to do a series.
And that's the fun way to do it too. You can flesh out a lot more, and it's a really great medium as well as television.
Yeah, the story's just too long and convoluted to do even 3 movies.
No, of course. Backstage, I was talking to you about a bunch of stuff, but I was talking how much I love, the Silver Surfer and how I feel like he is still underutilized. But hopefully, we'll be seeing him very soon on the big screen again. But can you talk about reviving Silver Surfer? And what did you really love most about that character? I feel like he still doesn't get as much love as he should, because I think he's one of the coolest ever to exist.
Well, as soon as they asked me to do it, I thought, no one has ever touched on the fact that this guy aided and abetted in mass murder. And he was this Jesus-like character, but he didn't seem to have any conscience when it came back to his own past. So when I finished off with the Infinity Gauntlet, I did a little story involving how Galactus had manipulated his memories and spirit to accept the fact that he had sort of denied the fact that he had done this rather than accept it. And I found that to be one of the most interesting stories I ever played with.
Yeah, any Silver Surfer fans in here? There you go, Fortnite time.
And anybody else who read those Silver Surfers that I did, there's one little mini-series in the midst of it called the Dynamo City series. And not many people catch on to it, but Dynamo City's initials are DC. And I was razzing on my last gal.
You're trolling them. I love that.
So if you ever get a chance, look back at them in that perspective.
I have one last question for you. I'm sure we have a lot of people that would love to know this. You know, what advice do you have for aspiring comic book creators looking to break into the industry today, which is obviously much harder than it probably was back then, or do you think it's, you know, vice versa?
I think it's harder to get into the mainstream big companies now because they've got people belong and they're going all over the world to pick them up. So they're getting artists in Brazil that will work for half what a U.S. artist do. So that's kind of hard. And I don't think you really need to get, in the old days when I started off on that, and up until recently, you needed the exposure of doing Spider-Man or Batman in order to get your name out there. But now with the internet and social media and all that, it's much easier to create something from the ground up and go from there. There's also a whole lot of different things, new things happening that I didn't have happening at the time. I mean, the better coloring I mentioned earlier. There's programs that a lot of the artists are using now that help get them reference. I personally use a thing called, I'm drawing a blank again. It's a modeling program for figures. Dash Studio, that's the name of it. And you can, what I basically do is this 3D figure that I pose the characters in. I can put lighting on them and that. I get my camera, take a picture. I load up on the printer, trace out the basic outline of the character, and use that photo as reference on, you know, of course, they're all naked inside the Dash Studio, with no genitalia, of course. But then I put the characters' costumes on and stuff like that in the pencils, and it saves a tremendous amount of time, and it's given me a chance to think more on the design of the page, the layout of the actual picture, whereas before I had to spend a lot of time on the construction of the figure, and this saves their time on that. A lot of folks right now are adverse to using anything to do with AI illustrations. I think that's something that we can use in the future to augment what we're doing. In some of the later Red Stars, I've been using some of the AI illustrations as backgrounds in some of the panels. You know, there's some foregrounds and things in it, but the cityscape, like in the background, will be an AI creation. And once again, it's a big time saver, and it really looks good. You know, it's a lot better than I could do.
So technology has really come a long way for creators out there, independent creators, I guess, using social media and the internet just got to get their work out, and a lot of great tools out there. And sometimes they're free or have, you know, there's a lot of stuff you can find to help you create these things. I guess going to the independent route is also the best way to do it. You're doing what you're starting doing your own thing. So you just got to have that hustle in you to get yourself out there on the internet. What a great advice, Mr. Jim Starlin. Did you have a good time? You'll be here until tomorrow as well, right?
Right, I'll be back to my table in about 15 minutes or so. I have to stop off at CGC. They got a pile of stuff for me to sign.
So definitely visit him. And once again, thank you very much, Mr. Jim Starlin. This is fabulous.
Yes, thank you for not being 4 people in the first row.